we've been inundated, and also there's been a whole talk about GFIP, which is referred to as e-tolls in Gauteng. It has been in the public discourse. We wish to state on record to clarify that Cabinet has not arrived yet at the decision with regard to the future of GFIP. What has happened yesterday is that we tabled the proposals, in particular the preferred reconfigured approach to GFIP, and the Cabinet deliberated on that and decided that we must go back and do some work and report in 2 weeks when Cabinet reconvenes. It is only then that we will then debate and present to South Africa what would have been a decision of Cabinet on the future of GFIP. And coupled with that, it includes further engagement with the Premier of Gauteng and whoever who's of interest and who have listened to even in the past. We have taken it upon ourselves to engage with everybody, that include Labour and that include the constituencies within NEDLAC. We have also engaged with OUTA in relation to their disposition on relation to the question of GFIP. And in this particular regard, all of those issues and options were actually examined, and we are now working on a preferred option on what we call, after the impasse, a reconfigured approach to Gauteng Freeway Improvement Program, which we all know in terms of its history from 2005, was introduced precisely because of the main concern and of congestion on the roads of Gauteng. And there was a need for government to intervene in terms of introducing a scheme that will ensure that we deal with minimizing congestion in the roads of Gauteng. In that regard, we have since then taken over from the previous minister and as mandated by the president to actually engage on the issue. Now, in our engagement, we're not only looking at extending GFIP or anything of that sort. We're looking, among others, including the question of what other people call the scrapping of the e-tolls. And among the options that we would have actually examined and to arrive finally at the preferred option. The preferred option take into consideration the interest of society, among others in general, the poorest of the poor, the indigent, and the road users in general, and what is in the best interest of us. It take into consideration the state of the economy in relation to the commitments we have made in the bond market, the capacity for us to borrow and to continue to borrow to upgrade our roads. It take into consideration to that because there's been a skyrocketing of the debt as a result of non-payment. But for payment to actually happen, you need social compact and, among others, dialogue. And that is why we've created the space of engagement on this particular matter. And also what is in the best interest of society. We also look at the principle of user pay. The principle of user pay, as it has been articulated yesterday by the Minister of Finance, must not be blown out of proportion. It is a principle globally and world over that is actually implemented, and South African government is no exception to that. It means when you use the principle, it must be fairer for the citizens of the country. As it were, in terms of GFIP, citizens represented by their mouthpiece have actually raised issues about the fairer thing in relation to the e-tolls in terms of GFIP. And that is actually taken into consideration. And we're looking at all of this and at the same time to look at what is good for all of us, for our country, so that we actually move on. So Cabinet will deliberate on this and look at all the suggestions as it were, as it did in its meeting yesterday. And then we will then arrive at the final decision in the next 2 weeks, and it means we must continue to work, and that includes Gauteng government, that includes ourselves, and that includes all those who are actually interested. And people may ask, what are the options that you are looking at and that you are interrogating, that were placed before you by various groups and everyone? The first and the most popular one, it is the option that look into the cancellation of the e-toll scheme. And then the second one, it is the scenario of partial shadow toll, a scheme. The third one is the sell the GFIP scheme to a private concessionaire. And then the fourth one is introduce a public transport fund that will prioritize public transport on freeways, support the Gautrain IRPTNs. And then the fifth one is introduce a hybrid funding model comprising a combination of taxes, a fuel levy, license fees, etc., to subsidize toll fees. And the sixth one is further dispensation and physical toll plaza installations, which is what you basically have got in terms of the rest of what you see in and around the country. And then the seventh one is implement the e-toll scheme as was intended. So for anyone to take to protest and to call for people to do away with e-tolls, you are fighting with the unknown, because we have not placed before the nation what is our final decision as the national executive of the country. So that is yet to come. And I've seen that most of the media houses are reporting because of what Minister of Finance have actually said, user pay and the nation must pay. He said it completely from the context of what Treasury must say in relation to calling on us to participate. What our people are saying to us is that we don't want e-tolls for the following reasons. We think they are not fairer to us, and we think that here in Gauteng we're over-tolled more than any other person. And therefore, when we raise the issues of the debt, others say you can leverage by looking at the question of the fuel levy and all other suggestions Gauteng has actually brought on the table. But in all that engagement, nobody says don't user pay. Nobody says that. But they say that how the tolling system in Gauteng was actually introduced, it was problematic. We agree with that, because people think that they were hoodwinked into it. But at the end of the day, there are obligations that we have actually arrived at. So we need to look, and that is what we're doing. Like I've tabled 7, and there are more. And to say at the end of the day, what works for everybody, and what works for the country, and what works for the best interest of our people, and for everybody who's got an obligation to this nation to subsidize what he or she benefit from in terms of the services rendered. But without government running roughshod. We've been dealing with this issue now for a very, very, very long time. And that is why steps were taken to even impose a moratorium that was defined as an impasse for us to go back and set up a task team reporting to the former deputy president, now the president, and us now to basically deal with the matter. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to state on record that we've got these options. The matter is now before Cabinet, and in 2 weeks, Cabinet will have finalized and will table before you the decision of Cabinet on the matter of GFIP. And we are going to be working with Gauteng and everybody else as we have been doing, and we'll take into consideration some of the suggestions that Cabinet have mandated us to go and look at, which at the present moment I will not be in a position to table before you, because it will be cutting, what is this in English? Cut the before? To exactly do that. Yeah, so we don't want to do that, because Cabinet engages, and Cabinet is sensitive also to the demand about the scrapping of the e-tolls. but the executive act in the best interest of society. And we also take responsibility for some of the decisions that were taken before, even if they don't belong to the sixth administration, but they've got a cumulative effect. But at the end of the day, we've got to move on, and we've got to march on, and we will then, in 2 weeks, table that particular decision of cabinet back to you. As it would have been communicated yesterday by the Minister of Finance, that the Minister of Transport, after cabinet will have taken a decision on the matter and reflected in the next 2 weeks, will then table what is the final decision of the executive on the matter of the future of GFIP.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. We're going to take a round of questions. Yes.
Minister Linda from Business Day. So then, the Finance Minister actually was wrong to say that government had decided, after considering several options to resolve the impasse, government had decided to retain the user pay principle. If that is only one of the options, he is jumping the gun to say that a decision has already been taken. And the second question is, these options, are these the ones that have arrived out of the Gauteng government, or is it arriving out of the task team that was set up between you, Treasury, and the Gauteng government? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Shall we take another hand?
It's Alicia Makinana from the Sunday Times. I'm one of those journalists that wrote that it stays because the speech that we were given in the lockup was definitive. It says Cabinet had considered all options and has decided to retain the user pay principle. So what the minister delivered in the House and what we were given were separate statements. So that's why we went with it. But I just need, Minister, maybe if you can explain to us these options, like you speak of cancellation of e-tolls. What would that entail? Would that mean you remove the gantries, or how is that going to work? Partial shuttle toll scheme, what would that be? If you sell the scheme to a private, I don't know how would that work. Can you maybe explain these options that you're considering, and what would each option mean, and or how would it work out?
Thank you. Shall we take another hand or two before we allow Minister to answer? Yes, ma'am.
Minister Lindsay Denton from ENCA. Can you give us the figure of what the unpaid e-tolls is standing at currently? I know there was a kind of a freeze at some point, and some was written. Or what is it at present?
Thank you so much. I think that will suffice for this round, Minister.
Yeah. Thank you. We must understand one thing. The user pay principle is what is being considered. And in this particular instance, it is incorporated, and it is a principle that underpins any service that government renders to society. So we must be clear. As a nation, we cannot, what is being argued here by those who are opposed to the GFIP, it is that it is not fair for them to actually pay for the reasons that they actually advance. But they agree that we need to entrench the principle of user paid, because if we don't embrace user paid, it means we will not pay for everything around us. Sanitation, everywhere where we actually go, it will be a free. The question of Father Christmas bucket has actually not worked since 1994. That is why the RDP in its total is not implemented, because once we arrived in government, we met a huge debt that we are still servicing till today. So the dynamics of our economy that we are dealing with today are not new in terms of our economic setup as a country. We did not inherit an economy that is smooth sailing, but it's an economy that functions within the space of the global setting, which most of the time changes not in our favor all the time. And the mechanisms and the policies we have actually implemented were actually challenged, both within the ANC as a ruling party and society in general, but some of them have actually worked for us to a certain extent. So this dynamic of engaging on issues and not agreeing is not new in terms of the South African situation. Whatever the minister would have said to you in the lockdown, he would have said that, But Cabinet reflected on the matter, of which he left before Cabinet concluded. So there has never been any decision that says we are taking this decision, Minister, go and communicate. And that is what was communicated, particularly in terms of the final statement, represent what Cabinet would have actually decided. So there's no confusion about that. So Cabinet mandated, there's no decision on GFIP, that decision is coming. And we will then debate the decision when the decision is there. Where are the options coming from? The options come from Gauteng province, which include proposals, among others, that we will, what Gauteng pronounced, among others, was that we will improvise, cut part of our budget to pay for the debt. Remember, already the money designated for rural areas, 5.7 billion, is now being set to service the debt of Gauteng. Now, rural areas where we are supposed to build roads, that program is actually held back because of GFIP. So urban area problem undermines what must actually happen for our rural areas around the country. So these options, outer and what they suggest, have been interrogated. And the claims that they make about the e-tolls, I've listened to them myself. I don't speak to them past each other. And probably in these 2 weeks, I will speak to them also about the claims they make and the things that they say why e-tolls as in the current form will not work. We are not working on a scheme to implement e-tolls in terms of its current scheme. We are talking of a reconfigured approach. Whether that reconfigured approach entails non-payment, that's what we're actually looking at, and what are the implications for the country. And that's what we're dealing with at the present moment. So in terms of options, what do they mean? The option one, for instance, cancellation of the e-toll scheme. Cancellation of e-toll scheme and withdrawal of declaration for GFIP phase 1 road work. It assumes that full responsibility for debt servicing obligation of the scheme. That's what it says, that government must fully service the scheme. From where? It must find money which it does not have. It means nobody must come to the party. Congestion and what we're doing in terms of improving the roads have come to a standstill. Remember where we were before this was introduced many years ago. And nobody must actually contribute. Government alone must. So that is what it basically says in terms of the first option. The shadow toll, it means implement a toll, a scheme that links government contribution to below 100% subsidy. The GFIP scheme to a private concession, it means the existing GFIP debt will be sold off to a private concessionaire, of which that particular private concessionaire must also agree that everything else in terms of enforcement will happen. Because if you are private and you own up to this, it means you are depending on the state to actually ensure enforcement. Now, will anybody else in terms of the current state have an appetite for that? You look into that particular option. But it is on the table, among others, to look at, which we actually examine. And then the scenario which says introduce a public transport fund that will prioritize public transport on freeways and so on, that is also been considered. It means the creation of a public transport funding mechanism. It's what we also, that is what that particular scenario means. A hybrid funding model means this option focuses on the funding policy side to create a funding mechanism. And the sixth one, which deals with further dispensation and physical toll plazas, it means the boom gates that you see everywhere else replicating to Gauteng. You will not have answered the problem, among others, of the very same reason, the genesis of the congestion on the roads. And then the last one, maintain it as it is, which as it is, what it means is that you are actually paying, and then in the form of all those countries in and around Gauteng, which is what everybody else is protesting about, and which led to the call for these particular tolls to actually disappear. What is the last one that I've not answered?
The figure of the unpaid tolls, where does it stand at?
Well, the figure of the unpaid tolls, in terms of the GFIP model, the debt level, it means where it is now, it will peak at 67 billion rand and requiring an annual allocation of 2 billion rand and so on. So to SANRAL for debt servicing for a 30-year repayment period, government will also need to write off all outstanding debt and reimburse the road users. Now, there's a whole lot of issues that we need to consider. The people who've been paying, the people who are not paying. At some point, this particular e-tolls were at 80%. I mean, not 80%, almost at 70% compliance. And then it dropped downwards. As we speak, there are people who are still paying because there is no formal thing that says that people must not pay. They don't pay as a form of protest. And that is why we are where we are, to then interrogate and come back to everybody to look at everything and scratch everything that we see and so on, and including scrapping the implications and so on. Those who have been paying, what are the implications and how do they actually come to the party? So there is nothing that we are not looking at. Now, if you say the introduction of the e-tolls were not introduced, to the satisfaction of everybody, it was bad and all of that, we'll agree with that, okay? Because it was something that was new. It was a technological thing that was new, introduced in South Africa, copied from somewhere. Was it ready for the developmental market of an African country? We will say no. Otherwise, we are used to stopping and paying because there is a boom gate before us. We are not used to go end of the month to pay for your debt that you owe, and at the same time load, and then you go in the freeway in the way you will. So we are not used to that. So we will agree probably that it was ahead of its time. It's like if in terms of technology you say we must stop pouring petrol in our cars and go and copy from Europe, you will have killed jobs. Yeah, there will be protests left and right. It works in Europe, it doesn't work for us here. So we need to keep the garages the way they are so that we create more jobs and their petrol attendants and stuff like that. I'm saying, fourth industrial revolution, advantages and disadvantages must be implemented in sequence for the developing nations, because what will work for our countries, particularly on a whole range of issues, including mechanisms that impact on service delivery, may not actually work for us. So that was the last question.
Okay, please allow us to just quickly check in with Pretoria and then come back here to Johannesburg. Mr. Baloyi, do we have any questions there? I know we have Sneh Temba from Jacaranda. I'm not sure if Sneh has a question or two.
Thank you, and I think from Pretoria we don't have any questions. Back to you.
Thank you very much. You have a follow-up, and then I've noted the 2 hands at the back, 3.
Sorry, Minister, to persist on this point, but if one of the options is the cancellation of the e-toll scheme, that means that the user pay principle won't apply. So the Minister was completely wrong in saying that that Cabinet has decided on the user pay principle.
Thank you. Gentleman right at the back.
Hi, Minister. Paul Vicchiati from Bloomberg. GFIP, or SANRAL from GFIP, has an outstanding bond debt of about 20 billion rand, of which most of that belongs to the PRC or the PRC's clients. Is this part of the consideration that government's doing what's going to do? Are you in negotiations with the PRC and its clients on some kind of either transfer or forgiveness of that debt? And that debt, from what I understand you're saying, is now a third of what the consumers or the users of the highways actually owe SANRAL. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yes, sir.
Hi, Minister Mbalula here from EW, and just clarity on
finance minister's remarks. I mean, is my understanding correct that the minister was just expressing, an ideal, situation where a user will normally pay for whatever service they receive, and not communicating a cabinet decision? Was the minister just, talking about how he feels about this principle? Because ideally, people should be paying for their services. And just on, is maybe in hindsight, should physical, toll plazas, those ones where you actually stop your car and take out your debit card and pay, would that not have been a better option in hindsight? And we could have avoided these years of, debates over this thing. Because people getting a statement, in their mail at the end of the month, it's very easy to ignore that and just throw it in the bin. Should those physical, toll boom gates not have been a better option?
Thank you so much, Andy.
Okay, and Minister, can you give us a percentage of how many people pay? You said it was at 8% at some point, and then it came up.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Many people were paying. We can only give you those particular figures exactly at the time when we deal with the final decision of cabinet. But you will know that at some point there was about 70% compliance. And when we give you these figures, we'll be able to support it with empirical evidence. So as to where are we today, I will not be in a position to give you that exactly. Business day, was the minister wrong?
Is either yes or no, Minister? There can't be any fudging in between.
No, I can't. You can't also put words in my mouth. It's not either yes or no. We're dealing with a very important matter here, and which affect ordinary South Africans. So it can't be answered with yes or no. What Minister Mboweni was talking about is a user pay principle, which he explained even in terms of his statement when he said that people must pay, meaning by implication people must then pay for the e-tolls.
No, he said cabinet had decided on the user pay.
No, I'm saying in terms of the budget policy statement, the issue he emphasized was a user pay principle. Cabinet, as matter is before cabinet, there is no cabinet decision on GFIP. And I'm saying it, and the spokesperson of cabinet have said it, and I'm saying it to you. Otherwise, as Minister of Transport, I would have actually called a press conference to explain to you the details and the modalities of the implementation of GFIP at all. So there is no such. Even in his statement, which is what we must focus on, in terms of Parliament, he explained that we are back to consulting with David Makura, the Premier of Gauteng, and that the Minister of Transport will come back and communicate. So let us not be diverted by what he talked about in terms of the principle of user pay. The fundamental issue here is that there is no cabinet decision to be communicated in terms of GFIP. So cabinet reflected on the matter, did not take a decision. The decision cabinet took was that Minister of Transport go back, consider the following, and then in 2 weeks come back and report, will then take a decision. That's what cabinet has decided. And the matter is now before cabinet. What it means for us, I'm going to engage with Makura in Gauteng and whoever is actually interested in the next 2 weeks and consider the views of cabinet on the preferred option that we placed before cabinet and come back and communicate. And what I'm saying to you is that let us not jump and say that e-tolls have either been rejected or have either been implemented as they are, because there's no such a decision. We will debate what is before us once cabinet have taken a decision. So at the level of debating this matter, we must be clear about it. And it does not mean people must stop protesting or raise their views. We know where they come from, and I'm not here to argue with them about the views there. I will debate with them when I'm presenting the final option on what government will have decided. At the present moment, there is no such a decision, and I wish to clear that air. What Minister said about user pay is what all of us agree on. And he emphasized that point in the context, in the same paragraph as GFIP. So you are equally right to think that it is fait accompli, e-tolls are continuing, not in a reconfigured approach. We are continuing as it is. There is no such. So we are interrogating the configured approach, and I've gone to town to explain to you all the 7 options, among others, that we considered that were placed before us. And you ask an important question, who is dealing with this? The President appointed a task team convened by the Minister of Transport, that include the Minister of Finance, that include Sanral, that include all the departments that belong to these ministries, but also it included Gauteng, because Gauteng is an affected province in terms of GFIP implemented. That include Premier Makura, and that include also his staff in Gauteng province. So that is where we are. What we did in the process was to engage with civil society. But within government, this is the task team that has been working. So when we present a preferred option, it is arising out of that process and the task team. And I can tell you that Gauteng has been robust, even in that engagement, saying that we must do away with e-tolls and all of that and so on and so on. They brought options on the table. We have looked into those options, which Premier Makura said, we are ready to pay. As Gauteng, do away with e-tolls, they must be scrapped. So we looked into that. So what we will be communicated will be a robust process that came out of that process, and that will have been processed by the executive. Then I will be able to put that before you, and then we can debate. And that will be the final decision on the matter. Now, I've taken strides to engage with OUTA, to engage with everybody, and we're still open to that as we speak, should people deem it fit, but we assist with the matter as we speak. And in conclusion, I want to say that you know that we've been postponing. We said in a month's time we are to postpone, because part of the people who constitute part of the task team asked to go back, to go and consult further, come back with options and stuff like that, and make suggestions on the table. We postponed. We said end of October we'll pronounce, and end of October we are ready. We went to Cabinet. Cabinet now is seized with the matter. In 2 weeks' time, when Cabinet reconvenes, we will be able to have looked at everything that Cabinet further suggested we must do with regard to GFIP in Gauteng. So let us not debate as though we're debating something that is on the table either for or against. There's no such. And that will be communicated properly through government processes at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think you answered, right, with regards to your question and the comments, Minister. I think it was covered. Yes. Correct. Paul, are you covered? Paul wanted to know about debt.
Sorry, Minister. Discussions with the PRC and their clients about the outstanding money that they owe.
We can only arrive at that discussion with everybody once we have made up our mind about the preferred option. At the present moment, we're not at that level. We are here with everybody looking at us and saying, South Africa, can you be decisive about GFIP? We are here with everybody looking at us in terms of rating agencies, in terms of the people we owe, whom we service the debt, by the way, every now and then, because they are interested in their money. And that is it. And so we can arrive arrive and engage with that question once there is a decision on the table about the implications of the decisions they've taken as they impact on what you say and the SANRAL in terms of the people that it owes. We can only do that. But at the present moment, there's no decision. And when we get there, we will be in a position to speak to those around us if they are infected by the decision we would have taken. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, once again, thank you very much for availing yourself. Any questions or follow-ups, you're more than welcome to channel them in my direction, Pretoria. And thank you once again for coming to us live. Thank you very much to our colleague from Jacaranda over there. Shout out.